bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we should be looking at in depth. Keeping me company today is writer and broadcaster Charlie Peters, and here's what's coming up on the show. What to do about our energy crisis? Now that's the rub. Could nationalising energy firms be the answer? And how do we make the UK more energy secure? And with 1 week to go until we find out who'll be the next Prime Minister, front-runner Liz Truss is reportedly considering slashing VAT by 5% to help with the cost of living. But Rishi Sunak's team warned that that would be regressive. And humans might be going back to the moon, but maybe not today. We'll get the latest on that mega rocket launch. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines. A very good afternoon to you. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, NASA has postponed the launch of its new moon rocket over an issue with one of its engines. The unmanned rocket is the world's most powerful to date. It was due to propel a test capsule called Orion far from Earth into the moon's orbit. Well, engineers say an engine bleed that couldn't be remedied is one of the causes of the launch being called off today. Well, they added that the first opportunity for the next launch attempt will be on the 2nd of September, depending on how the engine bleed develops. The Artemis 1 mission is aiming to prove that people can go to the moon for longer and even more sustainably than ever before. In the final week of campaigning in the Conservative leadership contest, Liz Truss's team says she favours targeted support to ease the cost of living crisis. However, the Tory leadership candidate says she's not ruling anything out. Ms Truss also says it wouldn't be right to announce her entire plan before she's seen the full Whitehall analysis. Well, Global Chief Executive of the market research company Ipsos, Ben Page, says the Foreign Secretary is under pressure.
Public now wants to see more action and more spending. She's slightly against the grain of the things that she says she stands for, but she's probably going to be forced to do it when she turns her attention from the small number of people who are, of course, choosing the leader of the Conservative Party to the electorate as a whole.
The Environment Minister and Team Rishi's supporter, Victoria Prentice, told us the former Chancellor believes help should go to those who need it the most.
Rishi's plan is very much to target that help at the most vulnerable households. So, for example, pensioner households or people with disabilities or households on the lowest incomes. And I think that's the right way to go. I know this is hard for everybody, but for some people it's really hard and we need to help them get through it.
Residents living near Europe's biggest nuclear facility are being given iodine tablets amid fears of a nuclear incident. Authorities handed out medication to parents and children living close to the Zaporizhzhia power station in Ukraine amid intense fighting. It says a team from the International Atomic Energy Agency is on its way to investigate the now Russian-occupied facility, saying its safety and security must be protected. The Queen has sent a message to the President of Pakistan saying she's deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life and destruction due to flooding across the country. It follows an appeal by Pakistan for international support as more than 1,000 people have been killed. Unusually heavy monsoon rains have caused floods in both the north and south of the country, destroying farmland, crops and impacting more than 30 million people. The country's foreign minister is requesting financial help and aid from United Nations member states.
They're absolutely devastating. I haven't seen any destruction or devastation of this scale. I find it very difficult to put into words the phraseologies that we're used to, whether it's monsoon rains or flooding, doesn't quite seem to encapsulate the ongoing devastation and disaster that we're still witnessing.
The Royal Navy's largest warship has broken down off the south coast of the UK shortly after it embarked for exercises in the US. HMS Prince of Wales left from Portsmouth Naval Base on Saturday when a mechanical issue occurred. The 65,000-tonne vessel's departure had already been delayed because of a technical issue. The government's confirmed Gibraltar's status as a city more than 180 years after it was first bestowed the title by Queen Victoria. It had been awarded then in 1842, but it was then left off the official list of recognised cities. Now, a newly published record confirms Gibraltar's inclusion. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson describes the decision as a huge accolade to the rich history and dynamism. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Do you think it's right that those at the top get more handouts in a crisis than those at the bottom? Well, we'll be paying for generations to come for the rich to get richer. 1 in 4 people now say they won't turn on heating this winter. Easy to claim when the mercury hovers in the mid-20s. People will die. Yet a programme to make shareholders forego mega profits so people don't freeze and starve was probably needed a month ago. So it's no wonder even half of all Tory voters want energy nationalised again. And it's not just today's crisis being dithered over. Energy policy has been a dead duck for decades, meaning Putin can continue to wage war on the West with gas. There is a real risk of blackouts this winter as we do not have enough gas to burn for electricity. But that's despite sitting on an estimated 2,000 trillion cubic feet of shale gas when our annual consumption is 1/10 of that. And that's despite Rolls-Royce planning to export small modular reactors to Japan as pop-up nuclear power stations to slash their energy bills. Technology built here, sent to the other side of the world, to a country that knows a thing or two about what a nuclear disaster looks like. They will tell you it's all Putin's fault. Oh yes, he may be set on trying to kill people this winter, but he wouldn't have been able to do it without the help of our politicians. Let's talk first to John Bosco Wobo from We Own It, a group which campaigns for more public ownership and would like to see energy firms nationalised. John Bosco, is this really the solution? Because in hard times, it means that people would be also taking on a lot of debt and a lot of risk.
Well, I think it's quite clear that this is the solution, but I think it's really important to kind of frame the problem. The problem at the moment is not necessarily the fact that energy bills are going through the roof. That is a problem, but the real problem is that people are unable to pay for it, right? So we are seeing grandma and grandpa, people on pensions, single mothers. We are seeing disabled people unable to pay their bills. And as you say in your kind of introduction there, it's all right when the temperature is hovering around 20%. But of course, we know that the winter is around the corner and it's going to pose a serious problem. So in essence, the point I'm making is that we should be looking at solutions that will cut people's energy bills. And analysis show that public ownership models across Europe are able to guarantee 20 to 30% less bills than private ownership models like the one we are running in the United Kingdom.
Let's have a delve into that because, you know, even under the public ownership system of full nationalisation, it would essentially mean the taxpayer having to pay the same wholesale prices that we're seeing now. And at least in the private sector, some of the big companies are able to hedge against fluctuations in the market, potentially absorb some of that. In hard times, they're the ones who have to shoulder the burden. In good times, they get rewarded with profits. And also, it's a fantastic entity upon which we can strap things like pensions. Would not nationalising it actually suddenly put the burden on the taxpayer? And when there is a crisis, when wholesale prices go up like they're doing now, that we still have to pay them?
Well, I think you kind of answered your question there. If in good times the private companies make billions of pounds in profits, in bad times, such as what we have now for people, it is the government that's actually carrying much of the load. It's not the private companies. They're smiling all the way to the bank. Just to highlight something a bit wrong with what you said earlier, in other countries around Europe, such as in France and Norway and Italy and Germany, where energy bills are significantly lower than they are here, despite global energy prices going up everywhere. France, for example, has been able to keep their energy rises at just 4% at a time when our energy bills are going up by more than 80%. And they're able to do so because they have a publicly owned energy generation and supply company called EDF that is able to absorb a lot of those costs. And one thing that's really, really important to keep in mind here is that under a public ownership model, the billions of pounds that get sucked out in profits every single year, if we took National Grid into public ownership, for example, we could save 3.7 billion pounds every single year. If we took, say, a company like a UK Power Networks, the distribution company that supplies in London, the Hong Kong billionaire owner of that company, Li Ka-shing, took out 237 million pounds from that company in dividends last year. That is money that could instead be going back into the system to subsidize the bills of families instead of being sucked out into the pockets of private shareholders across the world.
I mean, is this not just a case, perhaps, of just trying to make privatisation work to solve some of the problems that you're talking about there, the amount that shareholders are raking in at the moment? Because there's been an estimate that privatising energy, it was something proposed, of course, by Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the opposition, could cost in the region of well over £100 billion. And by your estimates of it saving about £3.7 billion a year, it would take decades to even make us even if the government had to buy out the energy firms.
I don't believe that's correct at all. The specific number you mentioned was referred to in the Times today, and even they say that that number has been disputed. By our estimates, if we took National Grid, for example, let's take just National Grid into public ownership and saved on the profits that private companies would be getting, we would pay it off in 7.5 years. The government itself, this Tory government, has already made the decision to take a part of National Grid into public ownership, and it is Parliament that's going to set the price of the shares of that company, right? So, of course, we would want them to pay a fair price, but in a time of crisis, the government would also want to pay attention to the needs of working families across the country and people who in need of help, as opposed to the share price of private companies. Just to kind of highlight something quickly there, I think there is an attempt by the private energy companies to muddy the water by talking about people's pensions. Shell and BP only hold 0.2% of British pensions. In total, the energy sector only holds 2% of British pensions. Obviously, we would want the government to protect those people's and their pension, but we don't think that it's a massive problem taking those companies into public ownership for pensioners. The government will protect them.
John Bosco, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this fascinating debate that has opened up, unexpectedly, I'd say, this time last year, but definitely a national conversation worth having. That's John Bosco Wobo, who's the lead campaigner of We Own It. Well, let's talk now to Mike Hewitt, who is a former Rear Admiral in the US Navy and CEO of IP3 International, whose aim is to develop global energy and security infrastructure. Mike, I mean, you and I have known each other a while, and we were sort of talking in our own time the other day, and you were saying that this energy crisis is an absolute scandal. It's basically war being waged upon us, and many, many people are going to die as a result this winter.
No, that's exactly right, Alex. You and I have been talking about this for quite a while. When we focus our energy policy on climate change alone, we forget that the consumer needs abundant baseload power. We really created this crisis ourselves by focusing all of our energy decisions on decarbonization. And frankly, decarbonization is not the enemy right now. The enemy is making the consumer the one that we hoist all of the burden on to reduce consumption, when in fact we should have much more energy available to the consumer. I think you've already touched on it. We need to go back and restore our fossil fuel capacity. We need to grow our natural gas capacity. We need to accelerate our nuclear power programs. And these are all things that really give the consumer confidence that we're taking on the crisis and not hoisting the problem on them.
Boris Johnson, maybe a sort of an outgoing remark to try and protect at least part of his legacy, has said that we shouldn't forget about the green agenda. And certainly that seems to be happening now that we have an energy crisis on our hands. But what is this I read about Rolls-Royce now on the cusp of selling SMRs, small modular reactors, to Japan, a technology made here in the UK? Because they've lifted their moratorium. Why are we not buying them?
Well, I think the UK government has every intention of buying Rolls-Royce SMRs. I think the one thing that I was very happy about with Prime Minister Johnson was when he announced both that he wants to decarbonize the country, but also the need for twice as much electricity as you have today. And when you look at those two things, what pencils out is you need 24 gigawatts of new capacity in nuclear. I think Rolls-Royce SMRs will be a key component of that for the UK. And I actually applaud the fact that they're building out their order book. Now Japan wants Rolls-Royce SMRs. If for anything, it's going to create the kind of industrial base that's needed in the UK to accelerate those same SMRs into the country.
And what are your thoughts on Boris Johnson pushing ahead with Sizewell C, the big large-scale nuclear reactor, which of course is now due to be largely put up by EDF, Électricité de France, who are in fact now also partnering with the Chinese on helping them develop similar small-scale nuclear technology?
Well, we've made some horrible decisions with respect to nuclear power. We have really handed this industry off to the Russians and the Chinese. And what you saw at Hinkley Point, which is the predecessor to Sizewell, is 30% of that equity comes from the Chinese. Now, the announcement at Sizewell is that we will not use Chinese capital in that project. I look forward to seeing how we're going to cover that 30% equity gap. I applaud the Prime Minister's decision to go forward with Sizewell because the enormity of the problem, as I said, is 24 gigawatts of new capacity. You need large plants, you need small plants. We need to go back to invigorating the fossil fuel industry, and we need to stop fighting a two-front war. The two fronts are Russia, China, and energy, and the other front is decarbonization. Decarbonization is not a challenge for us right now. We need to stop focusing on passing the burden on to the consumer over this fallacy that we need to decarbonize the planet and focus more on abundant baseload power and then be climate informed. There are many new technologies out there that will help us decarbonize, but you don't force wind and solar or weather dependent energy on the consumer, because if there's any lesson at all from this energy crisis is that when you are over dependent upon renewable energy, you don't have the autonomy to control when the lights come on or come off. You just simply can't legislate when the wind is going to blow.
Mike, always fascinating talking to you. Thanks so much for tapping into this programme from Washington, D.C. That is Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, a good friend of this show. Well, joining me in the studio throughout today is writer and broadcaster Charlie Peters. I mean, interesting points brought up. Let's start, first of all, with the nationalisation debate. I mean, astonishing poll, finding a half of Tory members are even saying, right, nationalise the energy companies, something that when Jeremy Corbyn was banging the drum about it back in 2016, people thought he was a loony.
Yes, and I think 50% of those Tory voters are loony as well. I mean, fundamentally, I just don't think they know what nationalise the energy companies mean. Do they mean nationalise the providers, the suppliers, the wind farms, the nuclear energy plants? Or do they also mean that we should nationalise the distribution and transmission networks? I mean, the energy supply and industry in this country is so vast that you can't just nationalise one part of it and expect a ginormous change in pricing. And indeed, whenever we found that there's been a renationalisation effort in Britain, the quality of the service has dipped.
But would you say that this energy crisis has shone a light on the current privatised model and shown up some pretty tasteless flaws, at the very least, things that are pretty hard for people to stomach when they see the profits in headlines and then look at their own energy bills?
I don't think that the problem that's been exposed has been errors of private companies, but rather government intervention being a disastrous failure in this space, limiting the planning regulation that we need to allow more nuclear developments to be propped up. Those small modular reactors that are going to Japan, I'd love to have more of them in Britain, but they're currently being prevented from being built in any short-term capacity. There are so many things we could be doing to develop our own energy security, and we just simply aren't doing it.
Yeah, quite, Charlie. Thank you so much. What are your thoughts on this, to nationalise or not to nationalise? That seems to be the question. What would you see introduced to help with this energy crisis? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, with just a week to go until we find out who will be our next Prime Minister, frontrunner Liz Truss is reportedly considering radically slashing VAT by 5% to help with the cost of living crisis. But would this actually be a cut too far? Time for a short break now. See you in a bit.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, when it comes to tax, it's normally expected those with more pay more. And when it comes to handouts, it's normally expected those without get what they need. It's a basic moral tenet of any civilised society. So while Liz Truss reportedly plans to slash VAT, and that sounds jolly for all, but if you spend 100 quid a week on stuff, you only get a few quid back. If you spend 10 grand, you get hundreds. It doesn't cover the things people need most either, like food and kids' clothes. Meanwhile, the vast price tag for such a policy comes from the government's coffers and will be paying, surely, for generations to come. So is it a bold, ambitious plan to make Britain competitive and manage inflation? Or is it regressive and flawed? Well, that depends whether you're Team Sunak or Truss. Well, joining us in the studio is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, I mean, these plans come out from the Truss campaign team, or reportedly come out of the Truss campaign team. Big slash in VAT. Of course, we saw this with Gordon Brown during the big crisis of 2008. Rishi Sunak's campaign team have come out and said, no, this is a dreadful idea. Explain to us more.
Yes, that you can see arguments in favour of it and arguments against. Clearly, the arguments in favour of it are that the prices are rising currently. If you take taxes off prices, those prices won't rise as quickly. They may even fall in some areas, and particularly this might be a good thing for businesses that are really struggling with energy prices that aren't capped. They're already paying much higher prices for energy than households even are, and so potentially you might be able to keep prices lower than they otherwise would be if you did this VAT cut. However, it's a very, very expensive thing to do. You forego a hell of a lot of revenue by even having that 5%, or I suppose we should describe it as a 25% tax cut from 20% down to 15%. That sort of thing is tens of billions of pounds in lost revenue to the exchequer. And there is the legitimate question in terms of where could that money be better spent? Might it be better to do a less universal and more targeted form of redistribution? But then again, there's also the argument that VAT is one of the least distortive taxes that we have. Potentially taxing consumption is one of the best ways, or least bad ways, that we could possibly tax. It's why Margaret Thatcher shifted so much taxation from income to consumption, because it's less bad in terms of economic growth. It encourages investment. Maybe you don't want a hell of a lot of spending when that money could be going to growth. So real big questions here over this policy, although some big positives potentially on the inflation side of things. It has been described in the papers this weekend as a nuclear option. It's something that is incredibly expensive to do, and potentially one of the reasons why the Truss campaign haven't come out with it as a formal policy and it's just being floated in the papers. Potentially that's to have those arguments now before they decide whether to do it or not.
I mean, Charlie, what do you think about this? Because it sounds really great on the tin, doesn't it? Slash VAT, paying less tax on the prices of stuff. Who doesn't want that? But it doesn't exactly do what's said on the tin, does it?
No, not necessarily. And I think the main reason why it's being proposed or floated, as Tom says, is that it's quick. It's a quick cut. It will make a difference immediately. And that's possibly the main benefit that we'll have. Because this is something, this leadership election has been going on for God knows how long, way too long, I think everyone can agree. And the country is desperate for some change to kick on as soon as possible. A cut in VAT will have an effect the next day, whereas other policies, targeted support and changes in our economic structure could take more time to have an effect and for consumers to feel that benefit.
But it doesn't really reach the most important places, does it? And when we talk about targeted support, something that comes to my mind is usually that takes quite a bit of time and quite a lot of administration to sort out. And the energy price cap's gone up. That's happened. These bills are going to hit people's accounts from next month.
Yes, it's really tricky to try and get money where it needs to go. You can have uplifts in the benefit system. That's relatively easy and quick to do. But where do you find the people who aren't really managing but are not on benefits? What is the mechanism to get cash to those individuals? Rishi Sunak has used in the past mechanisms of sort of council tax rebates, making sure that local authorities can deliver pots of funding. But again, that's clunky. Not always is local government the most tip-top shape in this country. Not always is it the most efficient way of doing things. People will fall through the gaps, which is why superficially, the Labour Party's proposal of just simply cancelling any sort of price rises and pretending it's not happening and spending however many tens of billions, maybe even getting into over 100 billion to make that price rise just go away with a freeze, might superficially seem attractive. But in the same way that the VAT cut would be a big subsidy to those who spend the most, similarly, those who have second homes or large houses would get the most benefit out of that sort of freeze. And also, crucially, most crucially, it distorts the price signal. And the price signal is the way that the market in the end resolves these issues. If the energy price goes up, then you get more reward for making more energy. At the moment, the market is screaming for more supply, and that supply will come if people can make profits through that. Additionally, it's screaming for people to demand less, to use less energy. Now, if we keep the price of energy at the same level as it is now, frankly, people will be using too much energy. It's a policy for blackouts. It's a policy for energy shortages. Really, we need to find a way to quickly get more supply into the system and, frankly, to get people to use less when they don't have to use as much as they think they do. And that's why the price mechanism really should be preserved. And the policy of Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, although they haven't spelled out in great detail what they would do, they do seem to reject the universal price freeze approach in favour of more targeted support. That preserves the price mechanism. And that's a really, really important point to drive home.
Tom, Charlie, thank you both. Well, let's talk now to Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine. A very comprehensive overview by Tom there. We know what Sunak would purportedly do. We know what Truss would purportedly do. We know what the Labour Party would purportedly do. Some pretty big holes in all of those policies. So what would the Liberal Democrats purportedly do?
Well, far be it from me to correct Tom, but it was actually the Liberal Democrats who suggested an energy price freeze first. And that's what we do. And actually today, we have the results of research which show that as many, almost 1 in 4 people in this country, 1 in 4 adults, are planning not to use their heating at all this winter. And
that suggests to me, Christine, that 3 in 4 don't actually need the help.
What?
I mean, if 1 in 4, OK, so maybe not so much as 3 in 4. There'll be lots of people, when you freeze energy prices, it does mean that you are also helping people who don't need the help.
What it means is that 1 in 4 people in this country do not think they will be able to afford heating at all this winter. That's what that means. Also, if you look at parents of children under 18, the figure goes to slightly more than 1 in 4. And 2/3 of us don't think we'll be able to afford heating on all the time as we would normally. So we are in a situation which is not about targeting help to those on benefits or low incomes. We're in a situation now where we are all going to be feeling the pinch. And what we need is not some long-term solution that comes out of the price market. It's far-reaching, fast action now, because we're facing potentially, if the government doesn't do something before they get their act together over the leadership contest, which frankly is ridiculous, the length of time and that they're taking and the length of time that they've been absent from decision making, we've heard nothing from them really. If they don't get to grips with this, we are facing potentially the biggest cost of living crisis in a century. And the longer they take to act, the longer they talk to themselves rather than actually getting round the cabinet table and coming up with a solution, then the worse the economy is getting and the greater the danger of us tipping into recession. Now, Alistair Darling, who was the Chancellor the last time we had a big financial crisis like this, was on the radio this morning, and he was heavily critical of what the Conservative Party was saying, the combination of things that they are doing. And he said, what you need is something big and clear and fast to try and fix it. Otherwise, it could be disastrous. Now, I agree with them on that. And the figures from our research show that people in this country are absolutely up against it this winter. It's only August. And almost 1 in 4 people are saying that they don't think they're going to be able to afford heating at all this year. Now, that doesn't mean that 3 out of 4 can. It means that 3 out of 4 of us will be able to afford some heating. But most people I know, my constituents are coming to me and telling me they don't know how they're going to be able to afford it this winter. They're going to have to make a heartbreaking choice between eating and heating. Pensioners going cold, the catastrophic effect of the government not freezing energy prices and using a windfall tax to pay for it, and the additional money which is coming into the exchequer because of inflation. Not using that is, I think, completely and utterly unacceptable.
Christine Jardine, it's fantastic to have you on the programme, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. Well, wouldn't have been lost on regular viewers that this programme has been calling about immediate targeted support for quite a few weeks now. Do get in touch if you agree. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, as the Royal Navy's largest warship breaks down off the UK south coast, there's a sinking feeling. But is this just a temporary setback? Now, first, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. NASA has postponed the launch of its new moon rocket over an issue with one of its engines. Well, the unmanned rocket is the world's most powerful to date. It had been due to propel a test capsule called Orion far from Earth into the moon's orbit. Well, engineers say that an engine bleed that couldn't be remedied is the cause of the launch being called off today. They added the first opportunity for the next launch attempt will be on the 2nd of September, depending on how well the engine bleed develops. The Artemis 1 mission is aiming to prove that people can go to the moon for longer and more sustainably than ever before. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson emphasised the need for those safety checks.
It's just illustrative that this is a very complicated machine, a very complicated system, and all those things have to work. And you don't want to light the candle until it's ready to go.
Residents living near Europe's biggest nuclear facility in Ukraine are being given iodine tablets amid fears of a nuclear incident. Authorities handed out the medication to parents and children living close to the Zaporizhzhia power station amid intense fighting there. A team from the International Atomic Energy Agency is on its way to investigate the now Russian-occupied facility, saying its safety and security must be protected. The Queen has sent a message to the President of Pakistan saying she's deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life and destruction due to flooding across the country. It follows an appeal by Pakistan for international support as more than 1,000 people have been killed. Unusually heavy monsoon rains have caused floods in both the north and south of the country, destroying farmland, crops and impacting more than 30 million people. The government's confirmed Gibraltar's status as a city more than 180 years after it was first bestowed by Queen Victoria. The title was originally awarded in 1842, but it was then left off the official list of recognised cities. Now, a newly published record confirms Gibraltar's inclusion. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson described the decision as a huge accolade to its rich history and dynamism. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to We Need to Talk About.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, you may have seen the news that our huge Prince of Wales warship has got a bit stuck, hasn't it, off the coast of the Isle of Wight. It set sail Saturday from Portsmouth, but it only seemed to manage the 13 nautical mile journey before, well, it ground to a halt. It's not really looking very good. Meanwhile, there have been reports of the RAF changing the way that they recruit people, with accusations that they may be actually dodging taking on the brightest and the best all under the name of diversity. And then there have been shocking reports about behaviour going on in our flagship aero-acrobatic team, the Red Arrows, all about sexual assault. They've been having to have consent lessons. What is going on with our armed forces? Well, joining me now to talk about this is former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Philip, fantastic to have you on the programme. You were actually the whistleblower with the Red Arrows situation. Can you explain a little bit more about what that's all about?
Well, I commented on it. I had been working with Chief of the Air Staff for over a year, having originally highlighted the issues within the Red Arrows, but trying to keep it behind closed doors so that he could protect the reputation of the RAF and therefore the operational capability of the RAF. But unfortunately, the longer investigations go on, and why it took so long within the Air Force when in any normal company it would have been dealt with within 6 days or 6 weeks. We're over a year into it. The longer it goes on, the greater the chance of something bubbling to the surface and exploding as it has done with all the other issues. And it's highlighting a failure in command within the organisation to stop inappropriate behaviours as they begin to bubble up, and that then gets worse and worse and worse. And as it's swept under the carpet more and more, the pile of detritus gets bigger, and eventually it just explodes everywhere. And that's exactly what's happened.
I mean, let's turn our attentions now to HMS Prince of Wales, which hasn't really made it very far on one of its big operational missions, out to do, I understand, some NATO exercises in the Atlantic, but it only got as far as the Isle of Wight. What's going on? Should we be concerned?
Well, as with the Artemis spacecraft, the excuse the Navy, I'm sure, will come out with is it's a big, complex beast, because it is a big, complex beast. And there are tolerances for things that go wrong in peacetime that wouldn't even come into play if it was in conflict. And from what I understand and the reporting that's out there is there's something wrong with one of the propeller shafts that's there. And these are not little beasts. There are 2 of them on board. They're hollow shafts, bronze-lined, wrapped in GRP, and they weigh about 240 tons each. And they're turning a propeller that is 7 meters in diameter and weighs about 33 tons. So if you get even a little bit of vibration in one of those, it's best to stop, find out what the vibration is, see if you can fix it. If you can't fix it, get it back into port, because whilst you could theoretically continue on one shaft, then what you don't want to do is put the ship in any further danger. That's going to be greater expense to try and repair. So exercises are all about trying to identify faults. Whenever they go wrong, see how you repair them. And this is a training exercise. They're just doing it a little bit for real with a real fault this time.
The invasion of Ukraine has certainly shone a light on things such as our defence spending and our readiness, really, to face any sort of aggression that might come our way and stand up for those who are in NATO. What do you think the condition of our armed forces is like at the moment in general?
In general, our armed forces are good. We are one of the few militaries that can deploy anywhere in the world. We can put a formation on the ground anywhere in the world to have an effect, whether that be a warfighting effect, a peace enforcement, or a peacekeeping effect. However, we lack some key capabilities because there have been some appalling spending decisions, appalling decision-making in the past, and that effect isn't as strong and powerful as it could be. And then there's not enough numbers of people to be able to do everything that, from our position as a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, the 5th largest economy in the world, the sorts of things that we should be doing. But the fact that we can put 2 aircraft carrier groups out, broken propeller shafts pending, but we can also put army formations on the ground, and we can fly aircraft from the Royal Air Force anywhere in the world to have that military effect, proves that we are doing it. And we're supporting what is going on in Ukraine, albeit not flying in Ukrainian territory. So good, but could be a lot better, I think the report would say.
I mean, you bring up there we frankly do not have enough people in our armed forces. So does it concern you, these reports that have come out about the nature of RAF recruitment, with allegations that they might be passing over some of the people who did better in trials and tests to get certain positions, all in the name of diversity?
Yeah, one of the problems that there is whenever you've got a society where there is no shortage of jobs, is trying to recruit into the armed forces, especially when you start to get this sort of bad news coming out where there is, aggressive wokeism trying to tick boxes because people think those boxes should be ticked, instead of ensuring that the right people are in there with the right training to defend our country. The armed forces are never going to reflect society completely. It has to be there to protect society, and we need the best people to do that. Diversity is critical within it because that broadens your thinking and the foundation for how you're building your armed forces, but it shouldn't be the driver.
Philip, thanks so much for coming on the programme. Always great to catch up with you and get your array of opinions on a vast array of topics, actually. Fascinating man indeed. Philip Ingram, MBE, who's a former senior military intelligence officer. Now, Charlie, you actually know a fair bit about the armed forces. I mean, look, we're seeing at the moment what we hope is a hiccup with the HMS Prince of Wales, but it's not the first error we've had and the first costly mistake when it comes to defence spending and our armed forces. So let's talk a bit about some of the others. We had the Ajax tank situations when we first put in that huge order for F-35Bs and had to scale that back. I mean, it doesn't always go to plan, does it?
No, there has been a calamitous range of errors in terms of our defence spending. Now, the two aircraft carriers that we're referring to were actually delivered on time, which was a rarity in the defence ordering process, at a cost of £7.6 billion for the two of them. But unfortunately, I mean, Phillips spoke that we can deploy them around the world. We can't deploy them independently because an aircraft carrier needs a strike group around it to defend it, built up of destroyers and submarines. We have an insufficient number of smaller vessels in our Royal Navy to actually support both of these carriers. And so they can't operate independently. Whenever one of these carriers goes to the Far East, for example, as the Queen Elizabeth did recently, we relied on support from friendly allied navies to carry out that mission. The F-35s, as you just referenced there, we originally put in an order of 138. We've got 48, and the cost of each jet is now £85 million. Again, not what we anticipated, and that has reduced the number of frontline RAF squadrons that we need. Air power is how you win wars these days. It's where you can have an effect around the world. We are limited in that space. And in terms of the number of troops we have, when we're just over 80,000 now, Boris Johnson promised he wouldn't cut the army. He's reducing it by 10,000 men and women. I mean, these are all things that make Britain less safe and make us less secure in an increasingly uncertain world. And I mean, the Ajax things you're talking, just to put a cherry on the cake, I mean, those are reconnaissance vehicles, and the problems we've had with them, that they make too much noise. So much noise, in fact, that soldiers are being injured and are being kicked out of the military because they're going deaf while testing these weapons. So it's a bit of a disaster from top to bottom, but amid the cost of living crisis, there's little hope that the military is going to enjoy additional funding.
Charlie, yeah, thank you for your candid views. Let me know yours. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @gbnews. Well, we're going to the moon, boomed the cinematic voiceover for NASA's Artemis lunar rocket's promotional video. Yeah, you did that over 50 years ago in a tin can with a computer the size of a calculator. The 500,000-mile journey to the moon hasn't been repeated since, with all the astronaut action happening just 248 miles away, a bit like driving from London to Middlesbrough. So why all the excitement now? But it is exciting, isn't it? The thunderous fire blasting out of 4 engines, providing £2 million of thrust, with 2 17-storey boosters helping it reach 17,000 miles per hour. Whew. Although it was failure to launch earlier today. Let's talk now to Anushka Sharma, who is the co-founder of the London Space Network. Anushka, my eyes were like glued on the television. I love anything to do with space, and I so wanted to see the takeoff today. What went wrong?
There was an issue with engine 3, and so we hear the term scrubbed, which means that the launch date will go to the next available window, and so we're currently now looking at the next launch window on Friday. So Friday the 2nd of September is the next attempt to go back to the moon. And unfortunately, space is hard, and you cannot, this is a test flight, this is a test system. They're testing lots of technology with this space launch system, which is the rocket that's going to be carrying the Orion spacecraft. All of this is new technology that is it can't go wrong. And whilst this is an uncrewed mission, this is very much going to pave the way for future crewed missions. So, if they have to scrub it by a few days to ensure that everything is going to go correctly, then they'd slow down the pace to just make sure they do all those pre-flight checks and start from scratch and sort of reload all the fuel again and start again on Friday.
Yeah, we're also joined in the studio by astronomer Mark Thompson. Still with us, of course, is Charlie Peters. Mark, I made a little joke in my intro there saying, it's 500,000 miles to the moon and basically 250 miles to the International Space Station. And yet we went to the moon almost 60 years ago. But it's far more exciting than just going to the moon, isn't it? This is potentially a precursor to getting men to Mars. Explain more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Artemis Project is all, it's not just getting to the moon, as you say, there's a bigger plan afoot. And the plan is to get people out into the solar system. We want people exploring. You can only do so much with robots. You need people, scientists, geologists on these planets, on these worlds, to explore them. So the whole Artemis Project, there's the 3 launches. We should have seen Artemis 1 launch today, which was going to send the Orion module, which is the part the crew would sit in, around the moon. Then there's Artemis 2, which was to launch around 2024, to have people sat in the aircraft in the module to go around the moon again, which would be painful, wouldn't it, going to the moon but not landing. And then Artemis 3, which is around 2025, to get people to land on the surface of the moon. And from there, we can then use that as a staging point to get out to the rest of the solar system.
Now, Anushka there was sort of talking about why the mission has been scrubbed. And there's basically kind of a small window, isn't there, to get this technology up into space. Can you explain a little bit why that is, why they're not just getting back to business tomorrow and have all day to take off?
Yeah, so in travel around the solar system, you're launching from the Earth, which is rattling around the sun. You're then trying to get to another moving target. So you've got to, it's not like just walking or, getting on the train from where I live in Norfolk to London, where the two things don't move in relation to each other. The moon and the Earth are both, and Mars as well, are all moving. And you've got to launch at just the right opportunity to make it fuel efficient and to make it cost efficient. So there are certain windows that we have to try and stick to make it work. We could go at any time, but it costs far more money and it makes it far more complex.
And going back to Anushka, who I hope is still with us, Anushka, what's interesting as well about this mission is, it's got NASA's badge all over it. The big promo couldn't be more cinematic and more American. And yet there's been huge cooperation as well from the Europeans in this space project.
Yeah, it's so great. The European Space Agency has very much been involved in a portion of the module itself and will provide the propulsion and in-space power that we're going to be fueling us towards like the moon and around the moon's orbit and then back to Earth in around 4 to 6 weeks. And what's really cool for the UK is Goonhilly's space station based in Cornwall is part of the team that's going to be receiving signals from the Orion space module and also from 6 of the 10 CubeSats, which are tiny, almost toaster-sized satellites that are going to be deployed on the way to the moon as part of some of the science that's being tested in outer space. So it's really exciting and great for the UK, definitely for Cornwall, and also hopefully for that future launch we're going to see later this summer from Cornwall itself.
Anushka, thank you ever so much. Mark, thank you as well. And Charlie, let's talk a little bit about how politically important this is, because, it all echoes back to the time we last went to the moon, the old Cold War, the old space race. And actually, when some of the Americans have been going on camera talking from Cape Canaveral, they've stressed the importance of we need to get there before the Chinese do.
Mm-hmm. But, I'm not entirely sure why. Sorry to put the damper on the enormously exciting proceedings. I'm slightly more concerned with earthly issues than those of the heavens at the moment. And we're talking about this, the research and how things need to get men back to the moon and beyond. Right now, I have a few more pressing concerns to deal with on Earth before I can gaze up to the stars.
Quickly, why would it be important to get to the moon first? I understand there's the looking for water at the South Pole, wanting to get down underneath, where there might also be huge resources.
It's all about giving us that opportunity to get out into the solar system. So it costs a lot of money to launch from the Earth because it's a big planet, it's a massive planet, it's a high force of gravity. If we can get to the moon, which has got a much lower force of gravity, it becomes a lot easier to launch. And we can mine those materials from the moon, and we can use that as a staging point to get out in the solar system. And it's absolutely something we must do to be able to learn more about our place in the universe.
Fascinating stuff. Mark, Charlie, thank you ever so much. Now, if you think I haven't cut through the BS enough this bank holiday, don't you worry. I have some concentrated baloney-busting nuggets coming right up. It's time to hit the sting for my agenda. Now, if you're at home counting the pennies, manically knitting draft excluders this bank holiday Monday and hunkering down ready for the winter crisis, it may rankle you somewhat that soon-to-be-sacked Minister Michael Gove is partying it up in Bifa. Hot on the heels of Boris posing like an overgrown gap year student in Greece with all of his hip young mates. Well, try to assuage that anger by reminding yourself of Gove's midlife crisis. Have a look at his moves last year in Aberdeen. And say a prayer, oh, there he is, arms in the air. Say a prayer for the people of the Balearics who, some might implore, are more than welcome to keep him. Now, it's a wonder he wasn't at Carnival this weekend, busting shapes and twerking in what is largely becoming a contained riot. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for Carnival, but having gone for dinner with my neighbours in Ladbroke Grove on Friday, I was astounded to see everywhere boarded up, as if preparing for war. The restaurant was even closing its doors for the whole weekend, while everywhere was battening down the hatches, awaiting what is basically our annual hurricane season. Yes, stuff like Carnival is great for community spirit, but is it so great for the residents and businesses who have to face down unbridled hullabaloo on an annual basis? And when it comes to community spirits, nothing says inclusivity like attending a Pride March wearing a Never Kissed a Tory t-shirt. Ah yes, that age-old misplaced left-wing moral high ground. Lucy Powell, the Labour Shadow Secretary for, culture, was showing how progressive she is at Manchester Pride by clearly stating that while she's on the side of the 3% of people who identify as LBG, and that's from the UK census, FYI, she wouldn't touch the 43.6% of people who backed the Conservatives in 2019. You go, girl, how kindly you are. Well, that's about it for me now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's the briefing with Tom Harwood. But first, let's have a little look at the weather forecast, narrated by my good self. Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is dry for many, although some showers are developing across the north and the east. Let's have a look at the details. Many northern and eastern parts of Scotland will have a rather cloudy afternoon, where further west we'll see some sunshine. There'll be a few showers developing, especially over the high ground. Northern Ireland may also see the odd shower develop, but most will miss them and have a dry afternoon with some spells of sunshine. Northern England will see a fair amount of cloud this afternoon, but it will be mostly dry. The best of any sunshine will be along Irish sea coasts. Wales, though, will tend to see some brighter skies this afternoon, especially out towards the west. A few showers may develop, but most will be dry, with temperatures reaching the mid-20s in places. The Midlands will see a dry bank holiday afternoon, but there will be a fair bit of cloud around, especially in the east. Despite this, temperatures will reach the low 20s. And it may feel a tad cooler than late across East Anglia this afternoon as a keen northeasterly breeze develops. It will be dry though, although rather cloudy. The east to northeast breeze will also be noticeable along the south coast this afternoon. Many of us, though, will see some sunny spells, especially out towards the west. Cloud will then melt away as we move towards this evening, but some showers will continue in the north. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle.